Welcome to this special session of the 2021 Conference on Land Policy in Africa. Ours will be a roundtable on African languages, and the title of our conversation is going to be African Languages as an Asset in Knowledge Creation and Information Dissemination on Land Issues. My name is Munyao Kilolo, and I am the Projects Officer at the Ngugi wa Thiong'o Foundation. I'm also the Administrator of the Mabati Cornell Kiswahili Prize for African Literature. For this roundtable, we are joined by Professor Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Professor Angelina Kioko, and Professor Kimani Wajogu. Before I introduce them and welcome their contribution, I would like to offer some background to our conversation. Landowners, especially farmers in rural areas, often find themselves in land cases requiring adjudication, arbitration, and all negotiations for commercial purposes. However, when they go to law courts or negotiating tables, they find that English and Kiswahili are the predominant languages for proceedings. Most of these farmers and rural landowners are often in their old age, and many of the younger ones have attained the English language through to high school, and both sets tend to be functionally illiterate in English. They therefore have limited access to knowledge and information concerning their land rights or the market value of their land resources. The use of English and other European languages often leads to their exploitation. When they must defend their case or argue for better deals, they find themselves incoherent in their reasoning and generally lacking the capacity to entertain some technical arguments. Most of these farmers and rural landowners, however, have a mastery of their African languages. Their mother tongues, which they grew up speaking, is an effective tool when they need to follow a line of argument. And with that mastery, they can reason their way into effective defense or deal without having to depend on reliable middlemen or interpreters. On the one hand, the African languages become a social asset employed to solve the land-related issues. On the other, they become an economic asset to deal with buyers as well as a legal asset to defend themselves in the case of arbitration and court cases. But the use of these languages is largely social, with limited economic and legal application. Most of the information required to empower them economically and legally is not written in their languages. When they need their languages the most, they find that they can only apply them in a limited way. The Constitution of Kenya sets out Kiswahili and English as the official languages in Kenya. However, it also states that there is need to promote the development and use of indigenous languages. The development of these languages has happened very minimally. The institutions that are tasked with land governance in Kenya have not put measures in place to help farmers and rural people use their mother tongues effectively when tackling land questions. This problem is, however, very systematic. African languages are deeply disadvantaged. Formal instruction in Kenyan languages, for instance, is only up to lower classes of school. Any meaningful development of capacity in these languages is formally blocked. Today, we hold a roundtable on African languages. It will address the conference's core theme of effective land governance institutions and administration reforms that are reflective of Africa's cultural heritage. African languages carry the cultural wealth of its people. This includes how they think about and settle issues that arise to affect the access and use of their land. With over-reliance on the English language, their cultural aspect is neither applied nor developed to their advantage. It is lost due to the deeply systematic problems that hinder the effective use of African languages. Our panelists today will focus on two core themes of the 2021 Conference on Land Policy in Africa. First, they will discuss what is being done in education and development of knowledge systems for inclusive land governance. Importantly, they will touch on how African languages can be integrated better into African education systems, the dissemination of land-related information, and the acquisition of knowledge. They will explore such questions as this already being done with any meaningful success through policy application in any of the African countries. What can we learn from the failures or success of policies where they appear? Secondly, the roundtable will discuss the sub-theme of land in African cultural heritage and creative industries. The panelists will discuss how the previously mentioned knowledge systems have carried the information in our cultural heritage and whether that is being completely lost with the continued marginalization of African languages. The conversation will also touch on how this is influencing the understanding of land issues across the generational divide. Allow me to briefly introduce our speakers today, and then I will invite Professor Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who will speak on the interconnection between land, language, and life. Professor Ngugi wa Thiong'o is currently Distinguished Professor of English and Comparative Literature at the University of California at Irvine. He was born in Kenya in 1938 into a large peasant family. He was educated at Kamandura, Mangu, and Kinigori primary schools. He was later educated in Alliance High School, and all these schools are in Kenya. He went to Makerere University, which was then a campus of London University in Kampala, Uganda, and then the University of Leeds in Britain. He's the recipient of 12 honorary doctorates from universities in Denmark, Germany, Britain, New Zealand, America, and Africa. He is also honorary member of American Academy of Arts and Letters and member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. A many-sided intellectual, he is a novelist, essayist, playlist, journalist, editor, academic, and social activist. His books include Devil on the Cross, Matigari, Wizard of the Crow, and these are English translations from their Gikuyu originals. In 2016, Professor Ngugi wa Thiong'o's short story, The Upright Revolution, or Why Africans Walk Upright, became the most translated African short story and is currently in 100 languages from around the world. It was also originally written in Gikuyu. Professor Kimani Wajogu is the director of Toweza Communications Center, commissioner of the African Academy of Languages, ACLAN, and chair of the Creative Economy Working Group, a network of organizations engaged in policy and legislative reforms for the development of cultures and languages of Kenya. He is chair of UUGI, the Gikuyu Language Association, and is founder member of Mutiri Journal. He has translated Kiswahili poems by Abdulatif Abdallah and Mazrui, Alamin Mazrui into Gikuyu. Professor Angelina Nduku Kioko is a professor of English and linguistics. She has over 31 years work experience in institutions of higher education. And this has given her wide experience in various areas, including teaching and examining both undergraduate and graduate and postgraduate students, supervising and examining graduate research at master's and doctoral levels. Her publications include 27 books, 9 book chapters, 14 papers in referenced journals, and many conference papers. Allow me to now welcome Professor Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who will speak on the interconnection between land, language, and life. Prof, you're welcome.
Asante sana. Ningependa kuongea kwa Kiswahili, lakini kwa leo nitajaribu kuongea kwa Kiingereza. Land, language, and life is what I call my paper. Our body is the primary source of knowledge. Indeed, even the most advanced technologies of motion, transport, from bicycles, motorcars, aeroplanes, to spaceships, are a projection of our capacity to move, which is already inherent in our legs. So also are technologies of sight, from eyeglasses to telescopes. These are projections of our eye, a capacity we already have by nature. We can say the same of technologies of making things, machines. They are projection of our human hands, or a projection of the capacity already inherent in our hands. Modern technology in general is a projection of the capacities of the human body into the external environment. Yeah. It follows from this that the next primary source of knowledge is our own body's interaction with the environment, the land particularly. The body needs the land for its sustenance. Land, that is, as a space for hunting, herding cows and goats and sheep, and of course for planting food crops. All peasant communities depend on the land for their livelihood. In working on their environment, the language of a community becomes the common granary of the knowledge garnered from years of cultivation and growing crops, and of course passing on that knowledge to new generations. All those knowledges are stored in the languages of the community. So every language is a storage or a granary of the best knowledge of their environment. That is the plants, animals, the weather, the seasonal rhythms of life, and so on. Every language has the best storage of the knowledge of its ecology. And no language can replace another in understanding and giving vocabulary of the specific ecology. That is, the entire interaction and relationship of all species in a given area. And remember, this knowledge accumulated from a generation to generation, so the new generation add to the knowledge they already have. Okay. What then does it mean for that knowledge system passed on from generation to generation to have their language? That is the communal granary of knowledge, or the communal storage of knowledge, replaced by another, a product of a foreign ecological system. The loss is irreplaceable. It is worse for the peasant communities who do not even speak the languages inherited from colonial domination. Graduates of the best modern universities in the country or outside the country cannot help their communities because their own education is entirely in European colonial languages. And they are completely ignorant of their own environment. The language domination of peasant communities has other life and death consequences. Laws governing land rights and other rights are all in foreign colonial languages. A peasant fighting for their rights have to depend on translations, sometimes by the same elite who also hardly know the languages of the community. And I want to illustrate this by a real life story narrated by the great Irish English writer, James Joyce. James Joyce was Irish, of course, but he wrote in English. But still, he had something to say about the Irish or the Gaelic and its domination by the English. Joyce published this story titled Ireland at the Bar in the Italian journal called Io Piccolo de Osera on 16th September 1907. It tells a story of 4 or 5 peasants from the village in Mutrasana in the western province of Ireland, arrested and accused of the murder of a woman. The accused, among them, a 60-year-old, did not know English. The court resorted to the services of an interpreter. Asked if he had seen the woman on the morning of the murder or the morning in question, the bewildered 60-year-old would go into lengthy explanations in Gaelic or Irish. And the interpreter would reduce the entire explanation into, he says, no, your worship. Asked if he was in the vicinity, the old man went through a similarly lengthy explanation. The interpreter reduced it to, he says, no, your worship. The man was sentenced to death. Here, translation contributes to the injustice meted against the 60-year-old. I would like to say that the case of the old man, seen by Joyce as a symbol of the Irish nation, hence the title, Ireland at the Bar, could be describing a scene in any part of the world today, where the majority are similarly rendered linguistic deaf and mute by policies that have set European languages as the monomative measure of worth in every aspect of national life. Everything from the organization of wealth and power and values to the administration of justice takes place in the context of the inequality of power between the dominant and dominated languages. In short, peasant communities in Africa, the majority in every nation in Africa, have no access to justice, even where it most affects them, their land and their lives. The African elite as a whole, the African government cannot continue burying their ears and eyes and everything in the sand. Justice and democracy demand that we restore their language to every community in the nation. I want to repeat, this does not mean we ignore other languages like English, for instance. But those languages English et al. Must be in addition to our languages, not their replacement. In Kenya and Africa, we must have, in theory and practice, mother tongue. In the case of East Africa, Kiswahili, then mother tongue first of every community, then Kiswahili, then English. Our mother tongues and their communication with each other must be the foundation of our multi-ethnic nations. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof, for the wonderful speech that you've given to us and the many insights that will go on to be very useful in the conversation we're going to have, and also the conversation around land and rights and language. I will just follow up with some of the things you've mentioned and ask 2 questions, and then I will go to Professor Kimani and Professor Kioko. And one of the things that struck me while you were speaking is when you spoke about the organization of wealth and power and the values of administration of justice and the kind of context in which it takes. And of course, the inequalities that come about because of the dominance of one language to the other. And in particular, the dominance of colonial languages, right? And my question for this is, because most of what we have in Africa is family land and family farming, and not much of this is not much kind of approach to land ownership and agricultural practice, right? And therefore, sometimes some pieces of land owned by farmers have high economic value, and then we have conflicts arising where state and between state and small scale landowners, or even the rich demanding to purchase or worse, grab said land. And unfortunately, if the people are not sufficiently aware of their land rights, then they end up getting a raw deal or their resources outrightly stolen from them. So from your understanding and from a scholarly point, what do you think could ensure that this knowledge of rights is enhanced, and especially to farmers whose only linguistic fluency is in these African languages? How can we enhance this knowledge of rights?
We first of all say this. I say this for deep humility.
Yeah.
African governments.
Yes.
Stop committing crime against humanity of African people by denying language, because it is exactly what we are doing. 90% of African people speak mother tongue. We should take it as a challenge, not as some kind of, I don't know what it is, but to bring them English, French, and Portuguese as their own. It's a crime, really, when you come to think of it. It's committed by colonialism, by colonial powers, and we continue nursing this, we committing the same crimes. We African governments against African people.
Okay. The other thing that really struck me is when you spoke about how people have to depend on translations, and sometimes these translations are being done by the elite, right, in the languages of the community. And when we think about, of course, the sustainability of agricultural knowledge and development, we want to think about how communities should be at the center of creating knowledge. And we want to, these communities continuously create, distribute, and share knowledge, not only within their communities, right? But also beyond the boundaries of their community. We want to see this land and agricultural knowledge integrated with newer agricultural technologies and innovations. But then when you mentioned translations, then it took me back to the question that we have talked about many times of the multiplicity of African languages and the dominance of European languages in most of the things that we do, right? That leads us to now start looking at this multiplicity of our languages as a nightmare, as a logistical nightmare. So my question is, how do we ensure that these farmers whose knowledge of land and agriculture is deep, but cannot possibly express that knowledge through European languages, do not feel completely removed from the center of creating that knowledge and its dissemination? How do we ensure that they do not feel like it's only left to the elite?
Yeah, the task for us really is to complete and do what colonialism did to our people.
Yes.
Right? Language is a carrier of knowledge systems. Okay?
Yes.
And as I said in the paper, every language has the best knowledge of the ecology of that area,
yes,
including plants, their medicinal qualities, and other things.
yes.
There's a whole knowledge system already contained in African languages and which is dying. And as I said, the idea is the problem has not been the fact that people also know English and French. No, it has been, the problem is a replacement of African languages by those of Europe. If one had the knowledge of mother tongue, say Kikamba or Yoruba, right? Then they had whichever is the national lingua franca, say like Kiswahili. Then they added English and French and Italian. That would be actually a kind of power, to be added power. But the way we do it, honestly, is disempowering African people. Do you know that in Africa today, children are still beaten by their teachers and so on when they're caught speaking an African language in the school compound? This is being done by African teachers to African children. Why are they beaten and punished? So that they become better masters as mimicking English and French and so on. Yeah. In other words, the African teachers are doing exactly the same thing that was done by former colonial masters. Okay. You know, I've said before, if African governments are serious, they must, at the very, even OAU, at the very least, make it criminal for teachers to beat African children when they are caught speaking their mother tongue. Why do we continue with this humiliation of our own people? Mother tongue is a right to every child. You can add other languages to it, to what they already have, not the other round. Not the other way around. Yeah.
Okay. Just one last question before I invite Professors Kioko and Kimani. I think a lot about when we want to develop these languages, when we want to keep doing this work, But one of the most important questions always is about resources, right? And if we do not want to wait until this indigenous agricultural and language knowledge disappears, then we will need adequate resources to capture and preserve this knowledge. And I keep wondering where these resources can come from, because sometimes it's just given in piecemeal or handouts, and there's really no staying or reproductive power in that kind of resource. So what are your thoughts about how we ensure that there's enough resources?
Sorry,
Yes.
I get a bit passionate about these things because
yes.
look at our governments. 90% of resources for language are go toward English, French, okay? Right?
Yes.
Right. So our publishers, the same thing. Our publishers are competing with youth publishers to develop the languages. Our governments are competing with European governments to develop European languages, right? And they have resources, languages, but they don't have resources for the mother tongue. Really. But mother tongue is a right, not a kind of, it's not a gift or something. I mean, it's a right, a fundamental right to which you can add other rights, okay? But you cannot replace it. You cannot say, I'll come and stop people speaking, even humiliate them, beat them, give them corporal punishment for speaking their mother. What are they doing to their minds apart from anything else? What are they doing to your sense of self? Knowledge and technology. What are you doing to them? What are African governments doing to our children, African children, right? Yeah. Let me just say this. As I said before, it's something I like using it. If you look at our as a whole, I put it this way: Europe gave Africa, not always willingly, but they gave Africa the resources of their accents, right? Africa gave Europe access to the resources of the continent. And that is still the problem today. They give access to their language, we give them access to 100% of our resources. They can come and take our diamonds, our copper, our everything else, and go and do whatever they want to do with it, right? Uranium, cobalt, whatever, right? And we are busy perfecting our accents, English accent, French accent, right? They don't, when they want access to our resources, right? So anyway, to me, I see it's a very urgent problem. Yeah, I don't think it's that. Yeah, it's a tragedy that we African people continue these crimes against our own people. Yeah,
I think when Professor Gugi was speaking, he talked a lot about the African elite and the African governments, and how they cannot continue burying their heads in the sand. And in view of this statement, and in view of the other stands that Professor Gugi has had over the years, I'm wondering what you think, Professor Kimani, what do you think is the role of government policy in enhancing the use of African languages, right? Especially by the people who need it the most. And these are the people at the community level, the rural areas, and also in semi and peri-urban areas. What do you think is the role of the government policy?
So thank you very much, Munyao, for this opportunity. And thanks a lot, Professor Ngugi, for really a very powerful and enriching set of ideas. I think we have to go back to the basics.
Yes.
What is the responsibility of government? I think that the
Mhm.
responsibility of government is to contribute in the welfare of its citizens.
Mhm.
And if you look at Africa, most of our citizens live in rural areas.
Yes.
Most of our people are involved in agriculture,
Mhm.
in fishing, in
Mhm.
herding, in really fundamental things that are critical for their survival. So
Yes.
it is the responsibility of government to ensure that our people, wherever they are able to live in a dignified way. And therefore, the way to do that is to invest very deliberately and
Mhm.
rigorously
Yes.
in those things that will help our people live dignified lives. And
Yes.
so African languages are part of that process of
Mhm.
giving our people an opportunity to live dignified lives. If
Mhm.
you look at the continent,
Mhm.
over 70% of our continent really depends on agriculture. And if that is the case, our immediate investment ought to be in giving knowledge through African languages so that we can have more robust production of food, more robust production of those things that sustain our lives.
Yes.
So that is so the government or the state has that huge responsibility. And then with regard to the intellectual, the African intellectual, you have to go back again to the basic question. What
Mhm.
is the responsibility of the African intellectual to the African people? And I believe that our first responsibility is to serve our communities with the knowledge that we have acquired in the journey of life.
Mhm.
That our communities invest so heavily in our education, and yet we are not able to give back that education because of a linguistic problem that we acquired along the way. And the linguistic problem is that we, in a sense, in a very, very strange twist of logic, believe that it's only through European languages
Mhm.
that we can carry intellectual discourse. So Munyao, I truly believe that it is our responsibility as intellectuals to serve our communities. It is
Yes.
also the responsibility of the state to serve its people by coming up with systems that allow,
Mhm.
better productivity in our communities.
Yeah, yeah. Now that you've mentioned the responsibility of our intellectuals, right? And I've seen that most of the work that's being done in African languages tends to be academic, and there's a lot of research, and so many people are doing dissertations on African languages. But most of this work is not really translated into literary material or publications for everyday use. For example, if I go to a bookstore in Nairobi and I'm just looking for a novel or a book in Kikamba or Gikuyu, they're very rare to find. And I'm wondering what you think are some of the things that can be done to shift from this being a largely academic process or scholarly work to these practical things that can help enhance our African languages.
Again, you have to go back to the decolonizing knowledge. I mean, how do you democratize knowledge production? How do you decolonize knowledge so that again it serves our people better? I do not believe continued studying African languages as an object of study for our people. It is beneficial to a certain degree, but it is not the only function of our work. We can study the ways our languages work. We can study the phonology, the syntax, the morphology. We can study our languages in different ways. But we must also produce materials. We must produce materials that serve our people better. And we know that some of those materials ought to be, consumable by our people. That means that we must build simpler versions of the intellectual work, even as we retain the intellectual rigor. We must invest in creative and cultural industries like music and film.
Yeah.
We must invest in those other forms of community media that our people enjoy. And I think that there is this disconnect that we will write very rigorous, intellectually stimulating, discourses about our languages. But
Yeah.
who is our audience? Who is the consumer of that, of our intellectual engagement? So I think that one of our functions really is the intellectualization of African languages. Our African languages must be part of the intellectual discourse about the continent. They should not be seen as an object of study alone. They must be part of the interrogation of knowledge
Yes.
found on the continent as well as knowledge that is found elsewhere. So I think that those very big books you find in our bookshops should also be found in our languages, and that's why we must always consistently invest not just in translation but also in originating material books in our languages so that they are able to serve our people better. That is my take on that, Munyao.
Okay, thank you very much. Professor Gugi talked a lot about ensuring that even the younger people have an opportunity to contribute towards the continuity of our languages, right? But one of the things that are happening today is that there is very little formal learning opportunities to enable Africans, right, to learn their languages and to realize the full potential of using their languages. And there's therefore an urgent need for organized system of teaching and testing competence in these languages. And I'm wondering, Professor Kioko, what are some of the ways that this can be done, especially among the people who need it the most, people in the rural areas and young people, to learn their languages?
I think really people in the rural areas do know their language. They speak it, they sing in it, they dance in it, they dream in it, they tell stories in it. So people in the rural areas know their language. In terms, we talk about the 4 language skills. So the listening and speaking skills of the people in the rural areas are very high. I think what the language skills that are deficient are the formal education skills, that is the reading and writing. And the challenges, I think we all know about them. So let me just look at some of the things that can be done. And currently with the education policy that is still trying to insist that the languages of the catchment areas are used up to class 3, there has been some publications for educational purposes in a number of languages. It has motivated our publishers who are focused on making money. Now that there are books that parents can buy for what is now being called the indigenous language, that is happening. Again, the new curriculum has African languages as optional subjects together with foreign languages in the upper primary and middle class, middle schools. That is what they are calling, and the junior, I think even junior high school. Now, whether the scholars will get out there and produce reading materials, both literary and grammars that are written in the language that can help that's another thing. But apparently, I am not foreseeing our languages sinking. The TV stations, what we call the vernacular, the mother tongue TV stations and the radios are already providing employment areas for those people who are developing their skills in the language, that they can collect news, write down the scripts, and present. And that is a really good move. If you ask me, Professor Jogu and I, in 2011, began working on the languages of Kenya policy. Right now, I do not know what shape it has taken. But if that languages of Kenya policy takes the shape that we had laid a background for, then the county governments will take up some part of the development of these languages. And when the stigma of the fact that people cannot debate in their counties, in their mother tongue, even though all the MCAs and the other administrators understand and speak that language. I think once we begin engaging these one as scholars, and then the leaders, I don't see our languages going down, but I see the need for a lot of engagement. I'm not sure that we need a lot of resources to get the Africans, the scholars who speak the languages, to develop the materials. I think that's my view on that. I hope I have addressed what you said.
Yes, thank you very much. In the interest of time, I will give each one of us just 1 minute of a last word.
I think one of the things I want to emphasize is the sweet statement that Professor Ngugi made at the conclusion of his presentation, that we need to consider English and any other language in addition and not instead of our languages, in addition to our languages. And that means beginning at that background, in the language that we dream in, and being able to do all that which you can do with a language in that, and that enables you to appreciate challenges of learning another language. So I would want to, I think this is a saying I want to write somewhere: English in addition and not instead of our local languages. Thank you.
Professor Kimani?
Yes, 70% that vote in Kenya are land cases. So if the language of the judiciary is English, and most of our people who are peasants, farmers, smallholder farmers speak English, you can understand the level of the miscarriage of justice that Professor Ngugi was talking about. And therefore, what is required is investment, real investment in the transformation of our judicial system to ensure that our people are better served. So the transformation of systems to ensure that health of our people, matters related to medicine and so forth, are also communicated in our languages. And I think that it is really a shift in mindset, and to accept that fundamentally there is nothing mediocre about our languages, superior about our languages, because these are the languages we are born with. And as Professor Ngugi says, it is the most strange situation where we normalize an anomaly. We treat a very strange situation as if it is the normal situation. We are able to master many languages, and so on. But I want to also just say, as I conclude, that because I sit in the Academy of African Languages, one of the things we are committed to doing is promoting African languages, promoting national languages, and promoting cross-border languages. Those languages that are spoken across national boundaries. Because when we promote those languages that cross borders, we are able to trade with each other better, and we are able to mingle across the continent better, so that we are able to learn across borders, using our languages. So I really want to thank you for this opportunity to engage on this very important topic of African languages as an asset to the development of our continent. So again, thank you very much, Munyao. Thanks a lot, Mwalimu Ngugi, for a fantastic conversation with you today.
Thank you very much, Professor Kimani, and to Professor Ngugi for a last word.
Yeah, me first. It's so easy to forget all the work which is done by African intellectuals towards promote changing government policies. And Kimani, Kioko, and what you are doing is very, very important at the level also of practicality of pushing government policies, the changes, and so on. Let's continue doing that. The other thing we must not forget that now there is actually quite a lot of work being done here and there by Africans in writing in African languages and so on. So the promote is catching on, but we need to do more. And last point I want to stress is what has already been mentioned, really. The economic potential of the many languages we have. Really, imagine for just in the area of publishing, if a book written, say, in Kikamba, right? Say a children's book in Kikamba, story, very good story. Then it translated into the more than 40 languages of Kenya, right?
Mm.
And it sells only about 100 copies in each. I mean, already, even in terms of book value, that's already a big asset, okay? So we can turn our many languages into an economic asset. It's not only books, other things can be facilitated, right? So we should also see the, I like mentioning this because let me just mention this. Shamba, the first Kenya one, who made the first aeroplane in Kenya, or the airplane made in Kenya. He made fly. He, from what I understand, he was a bicycle repairer, and most likely he spoke Kikoyo, not English. The guy who stopped him instead of helping him was Charles Jonjo, educated in South Africa, in England, everywhere, but his education could not see the potential of what Shamba was doing. So we need to change our position. And I keep on saying, Pete, there's nothing wrong with English language or French or Japanese or Mandarin, but there's something entirely wrong in giving up our languages in order to acquire those other languages. If we add them to what we already have, is an asset, is empowerment, okay? But what we do right now is no longer, it's not empowerment. Although, as I said, I must acknowledge the efforts going on all around the continent to address this issue.
Thank you very much, Professor Gugi, for this comments. I want to thank everyone who has taken the time to listen to our roundtable conversation today. Our conversation with African languages is an asset in knowledge creation and information dissemination on land issues. I again thank Professor Gugi Wathiongo, Professor Angelina Kioko, Professor Kimani Wajogu for their contribution to this roundtable conversation. Thank you and see you again soon in another conversation. Goodbye for now.
Thank you.